So this is not a criticism of the work that the board of directors are doing. It's just about, it's not pointing out what they're doing wrong. It's really about the clarity of what boards can do. Because what boards are having to deal with today is very different from what it was 5 or 10 years ago. It is visible exterior repairs are identified early. Maybe it's siding, balcony, membrane work. The boards need to make, they sometimes make a reasonable decision to defer, but it can end up costing them. So let me give you an example. I'm aware of a situation where 2007, a corporation had second level cantilevered balconies. The cantilevered structure was deteriorating. It was identified. They had, I believe it was about a $38,000 quote in front of them to repair it all. In 2022, I believe it was 2022, they finally did something about it, but it was because the cantilevered balconies were no longer safe and they had to be cut off and new structures had to be built. Engineers had to be brought in. Development permits. They had to go into the units and actually fix the kitchen floors. I believe it was 38,000, went to 241,000 or something very close to that. So as you can see, scope expands, the urgency increases, and the board's flexibility disappears. So what was a manageable project, it became something completely else. So delay costs. Legislation. We're not going to go too deep into legislation today, but there's a few really important realities, and one of them is that governance expectations are increasing. There's more emphasis on documentation of issues, the transparency of what is happening within the community and at the board level, and then the structured decision making. So we just recently had Bill 30 come into effect in February, and this is putting a financial requirement onto the corporations, but there's a little bit broader involved. It also gives owners more of a streamlined method or process in which they can put boards into a position where boards have to be disclosing. They have to be showing what it is they're doing. So this is, in practice, this is less concerning about knowing the specifics of the legislation, and it's more about how the boards operate day to day. So are the decisions being documented? Do the board members have enough information to make these informed decisions? Is there a clear rationale for their decisions? And then are these decisions being communicated effectively to the owners? So this can be where risk is either reduced or created. Fiduciary duty. So at a practical level, fiduciary duty really comes down to how decisions are made. Are the board members acting in the best interest of the corporation? Are the board members taking the time necessary to make informed decisions? More importantly, are the board members not delaying when the action is required? And this is where we want to keep our tone realistic, because what we typically see from boards are not poor decisions, but it's the delays, and the delays seem reasonable in the moment. It's like, we'll wait another year, or let's get more information, or let's avoid putting pressure on the owners. And that's a big one that's put forward really, really often. And it's all very understandable. But over time, these delays tend to increase the costs and the risk. And at the end of the day, the board must be working for the best interest of the corporation. Insurance is one of the big pressure points right now. Premiums are increasing, but way more importantly, it's the deductibles that are increasing. So to keep your premiums reasonable, the risk is being offset with a higher deductible. Yes, you get to have a lower number on your operating budget, but we're seeing significant deductibles being applied to corporations. And what happens is this: one claim, is usually manageable. But what happens when there's multiple claims in a short period of time? That's real financial pressure. Most boards do not have the ability to sustain multiple losses in a year. A good example is this one. We had a corporation where in a 5-week period, we had 3 separate water losses. 3. Each one of those water losses had a $25,000 deductible. Each of those water losses were well in excess of those deductibles, which means the corporation had to sustain the cost of those 3 deductibles. None of this was able to be foreseen. It was just a fluke, but it happened. And we had to go to the owners immediately and have a cash call to offset those costs for the second 2 water losses. We didn't have the ability to plan for it. We didn't have the ability to give the owners notice. It had to go out quickly. So how do we plan for that? That's part of what boards need to look at. Individually managed, they're very disruptive, Most cases, the exposure wasn't planned for, and so now the boards have to react. That's part of the planning process. The contractor and cost management is there's a lot of money involved with this, and it's one of the most underestimated drivers of cost. It is this is such a big topic, but most of the cost overruns are not bad luck. They come from poor execution. It starts with an unclear scope of work. The true nature of the work is not understood. It's not conveyed to the contractors as the quoting process is happening. It then goes on to decisions by the board. Do they go with the lowest bidders? Not fully understanding what the work entails. Then it goes on to when these contractors are coming in and these missing parts of the work are identified, now you've got change orders. So when there's a lack of oversight, when there's a lack of understanding, when there's a lack of knowledge in these specific areas, this is where a lot of money can be spent quickly and needlessly. So the goal isn't to spend more and take the highest bidder. The goal is to spend it correctly using the right people to give the boards of directors the right information so that they can make good, timely decisions. The next one is reserve fund. So the reserve fund is essentially the foundation of the long-term planning process for the capital areas of the property. And what we often see is a disconnect between the reserve study and the reality of the situation. The study may be technically correct, but it doesn't align with actual timing of the components. It also, we see projects needing to be dealt with sooner. We see components lasting longer than anticipated on the study. And so these changes actually have fundamental costing changes to the owners, to the budgets. When the funding is not keeping pace with the expenditures, this is where gaps are created. This is where they can lead to difficult decisions. An example is I'm aware of a property right now that is looking at a roof issue that is coming up sooner rather than later. Vast majority of the residents are older on fixed incomes. And because of what's required and what's going to be needed, and because they chose to reduce their funding into the reserve fund over the last 15, 20 years, they're now in a situation within the next 4 years, these owners are going to have to come up, each one of these owners are going to have to come up with $22,000. That hurts. And some of these owners will not be able to sustain that. And they're already talking about having to make changes at a time of their life when they didn't want to. So the reserve fund only works in reality if you look at it as a living document that needs to be constantly worked at and adjusted. So we then move on to reactive governance. And this is where when you step back and you look at this together, you can see that patterns start to emerge. Reactive governance doesn't feel like a problem in the moment. It feels like, you know what, we're going to deal with this next year, or let's let the next board deal with it. Let's wait and see. We don't want to burden the owners with it right now. Someone someone elderly, maybe on a fixed income, doesn't have the ability to sustain this. Well, slow and steady always works. So, and it also has to be from a corporation standpoint. You can't take one or two or three people's needs as the focus of what it is you're doing. These are all reasonable thoughts, but over time, this impact compounds. The costs are increasing all the time. The board's flexibility will continually decrease as you do this reactive. Decisions become more difficult because you have less and less flexibility, and financial and operational pressures just continue to build. Proactive governance is literally the opposite. This is where boards tend to look at things a little bit differently. They plan many years in advance. They work hard on aligning the reserve fund with the actual components on their buildings. They work with competent managers. They manage projects proactively. They communicate consistently with the owners. They get buy-in from the owners. And that last piece, that communication, that is the critical point. When the owners understand the issues, vast majority of the time, the owners will buy in. And once you have the owners buying into what it is that is happening, the decisions, they become so easy to implement. It really does become easy. The the expectations of the owners are managed at that point. Owner communication runs through everything we've talked about, everything. Special assessments, the insurance, the projects, the planning. When the owners have good communication, it reduces the friction. Good communication, it creates understanding. Good communication allows boards of directors to move forward with decisions more effectively. They've got owner buy-in. So key takeaways are, you know what? Key takeaways are, if board is not doing things today, there are very likely avoidable costs and risks in your building that you're participating in. So from a checklist point, are you planning projects years ahead of time? Do you understand the true insurance exposure, including the deductibles? Are your decisions being based on current information, or are you delaying your decisions? When you're looking at the work, the scopes of work, is the work being clearly defined before contractors are engaged? Is the reserve fund aligned with the actual components on your building? Are the boards of directors communicating well with the owners? And not just when issues arrive, but proactive communication. And do you, as board members, have the right level of expertise supporting your decisions? Do you have good people that you can rely on, good managers, good experts? So plan earlier, act sooner, align your funding with reality, manage your projects, communication, and you know what? These are the things that help you to control the costs and the risks over time. So with that, I think what we'll do is we'll go on to any Q&A if there are any. I don't see any questions and answers. If anybody has a question, just by all means, go ahead, drop one into the comment section and I'll see if I can answer it. I know it's a really big topic, you guys. Really big topic, and we just blew through it today. Just blew through it. There's so much more we could say on each one. There's a lot of different ways you can deal with each one. Every property is different. There's no one step approach that fits all the buildings. But at the end of the day, I think you as board members are well equipped to make these decisions, and with good intentions, I think you'll do well. Okay, if there's no questions, then I think we'll sign off. All right. Thank you everyone for attending and look forward to the next one. Have a good day.